"This is it," Melissa Caldwell said, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips as she held the pen over the divorce papers. The room silent except for the soft shuffle of papers from the clerk's desk. Nathan Caldwell sat across from her, calm but alert, watching the moment unfold with an almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. The sunlight from the courthouse windows glinting on his wedding ring and highlighting the steady rhythm of his breathing, evidence of a patience honed over years, of careful observation and quiet reflection. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee, a mundane aroma that contrasted sharply with the charged tension of expectation, anticipation, and unspoken rivalry. Nathan's eyes never left the papers in front of Melissa, tracing the lines as she moved the pen, seeing not only the ink but the intention behind each stroke, the assumption that she had already won because the $20 million lottery had placed her on a pedestal she believed untouchable. His hands rested lightly on the table, fingers intertwined, as he considered the sequence of events that had brought them here, the small choices, the overlooked details, the quiet accumulation of evidence that only a careful mind could assemble, a stark counterbalance to her visible triumph. He remembered the day the ticket was purchased, how Melissa had brushed past him on the way out the door, the casual indifference, the excitement reserved for her friends, the careful omission of any acknowledgement that the money could affect them both. He recalled the meticulous tracking of their accounts, the dates, the transfers, the financial statements tucked away in folders he had reviewed countless times, each page a silent testament to his foresight and patience, the unspoken readiness for this very confrontation. The gallery of witnesses, court staff, and Melissa's friends provided a soft murmur of background that Nathan filtered out, focusing on the patterns, the sequences, the timing, understanding that calm observation could often convey more authority than words ever could. Melissa glanced up, expecting perhaps a reaction of panic, anger, or frustration, but Nathan only nodded once, almost imperceptibly, a signal of restrained acknowledgement, a quiet force that carried weight far beyond volume or spectacle. He considered the strategic pauses, the way the pen hovered, the slight twitch in Melissa's expression, and knew that the moment was unfolding exactly as planned, that each tiny movement, each flicker of attention, each micro-expression was being noted, categorized, and stored for the precise moment of revelation. He allowed the natural light to highlight the subtle creases in Melissa's brow, the fleeting doubt she did not recognize, the tension in her shoulders as the final lines were traced, and he felt a quiet satisfaction not of triumph, but of preparation executed flawlessly. The courthouse clock ticked steadily, each second a metronome marking the deliberate pacing of events. Nathan's calm presence a counterpoint to the assumed dominance of his wife. As she signed, her smile faltered ever so slightly, a small crack that went unnoticed by the casual observer, but not by him, a confirmation that patience, timing, and meticulous preparation had begun to take effect. He sipped water slowly, maintaining poise, the soft clink of glass against the table unnoticed by anyone else, but resonating in his awareness as a reminder of control, the quiet accumulation of advantage that did not require words, gestures, or confrontation. And in that quiet moment, as Melissa set the pen down and looked up with a faint flush, Nathan knew the first move had been made, the initial assumption challenged, and the stage set for the carefully orchestrated unfolding of truth that would follow, a testament to restraint, observation, and the subtle yet undeniable assertion of presence. The pen had barely settled on the table when Robert Haynes, Nathan's attorney, lifted his hand with the calm precision of a man who had been waiting for exactly this second. He was not dramatic. He did not lean forward like someone begging to be heard. He simply stood beside Nathan, adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit, and said, "Your Honor, before you accept that filing, there is one document Mrs. Caldwell forgot existed." The words moved through the courtroom like a cold draft under a closed door. Judge Margaret Whitaker looked up from the paperwork, her reading glasses low on her nose, and the quiet in the room changed shape. Melissa's smile held for another second, maybe two, but it no longer looked natural. It looked maintained. There is a difference. A real smile moves without effort. A maintained smile has to work for its place on your face. Nathan noticed that. He noticed everything now. the slight turn of Melissa's wrist as she pulled her hand back from the signed papers. The way her attorney, a polished man named Victor Lang, shifted his eyes toward Robert's folder. The way the court clerk stopped typing for half a beat. Money had taught Melissa to enter rooms like applause was owed to her, but a courtroom does not clap. A courtroom listens. Nathan sat with both feet planted on the floor, his hands resting quietly in front of him, the skin under his wedding band lighter than the rest of his finger from years of wearing what he once thought was a promise. He remembered thinking, months earlier, that the lottery win would save them. $20 million. The kind of number that makes people imagine lake houses, paid mortgages, new trucks, college funds, vacations where the ocean looks too blue to be real. But money does not repair a cracked foundation. It only shines a brighter light through the gaps. Melissa had not said, "We won." She had said, "I won." 2 words. 1 crack. And now that crack had made its way to the judge's bench. Victor Lang stood quickly, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, this appears to be a delay tactic. The parties have already reviewed the proposed filing." Robert did not look at him. He kept his eyes on the judge. "This document goes directly to asset classification, disclosure, and the accuracy of Mrs. Caldwell's sworn financial statement." Melissa's fingers tightened around the edge of her chair. Nathan saw it and felt no satisfaction, only the heavy confirmation of what he had known in his bones. She had believed he was too ordinary to understand the game. A maintenance technician who fixed commercial heating systems and drove a Ford with 180,000 miles on it. A husband who wore work boots into diners and checked tire pressure before road trips. She had mistaken plain living for simple thinking. Judge Whitaker extended her hand. "Let me see it." Robert opened the folder, removed a single document with a paper clip at the top, and handed it to the bailiff, who carried it forward. The room seemed to shrink around that paper. Melissa gave a soft laugh, but this time no one joined her. "This is absurd," she whispered, not to the judge, not to her attorney, but to herself. Nathan turned his head just enough to look at her. He did not say a word. He did not need to. For 3 months, she had built a future on the assumption that he would be embarrassed into silence. She had rented a downtown apartment before filing. She had taken meetings with financial advisors alone. She had told friends that Nathan would be lucky if she let him keep his toolbox and his old truck. She had forgotten that quiet men still keep receipts. Judge Whitaker read the first page. Then she turned to the second. The courtroom held its breath without realizing it. Robert remained standing. Victor stopped fidgeting. Melissa's face went still in a way Nathan had never seen before. Not angry. Not proud. Still, like someone hearing footsteps in a hallway she thought was empty. The judge lowered the document slightly and looked over her glasses. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her voice even but colder now, "why was this not included in your disclosure?" And in that moment, Nathan watched the laughter leave the room as if someone had opened a window and let it escape. Nathan did not answer the judge's question. It was not his question to answer. He sat still while Melissa looked at the document as if the words on it had rearranged themselves without permission. That was the thing about truth. It did not become dangerous when it was spoken. It became dangerous when it was written down, dated, signed, and placed in front of a judge who had no reason to care about anyone's performance. Judge Whitaker waited, one hand resting on the paper, her expression patient in the way only experienced judges can be patient. Not gentle, not warm, patient. The kind of patience that lets a person dig their own hole with complete sentences. Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it. Victor Lang leaned toward her and whispered something, but she did not look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the document Robert had submitted, and Nathan knew exactly what she was seeing because he had stared at the same page at his kitchen table every night for weeks. A copy of the bank transaction. A timestamp from the gas station in Mason, Ohio. The last 4 digits of the debit card tied to their joint checking account. The same joint account where Nathan's paychecks had landed every other Friday for 8 years. The same account that paid the mortgage, utilities, car insurance, and groceries. The same account Melissa had treated like background noise until that one Tuesday afternoon when it purchased a small paper ticket that became worth more than either of them had ever imagined. Before all this, Nathan had been an ordinary man by every visible measure. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered from honest work, with hands that always seemed to carry some trace of machine oil no matter how hard he washed them. He worked maintenance for a medical equipment supplier outside Cincinnati, driving between warehouses, clinics, and small manufacturing buildings in a white service van with a ladder rack and a cracked cup holder. His days were not glamorous. He changed filters, repaired rooftop units, checked compressors, tightened fittings, replaced belts, and answered emergency calls when heat failed in January or air conditioning quit in July. He knew the sound of failing motor made before most people noticed a problem. He knew how to make old systems last one more season. He knew how to keep things running. That was what he had tried to do with his marriage. Keep it running. Keep it warm. Keep the lights on. Melissa had once loved that about him, or at least he believed she had. In the early years, she would sit on the counter in their little rental duplex, eating takeout from cardboard containers while he fixed a leaky faucet with a flashlight between his teeth. She called him steady then. She said steady was rare. She said a man who showed up was worth more than a man who showed off. Nathan carried those words like a medal through every hard month that followed. When her car needed tires, he worked overtime. When her dental bill came due, he sold his fishing boat. When she wanted to go back to school for a certificate program, he packed lunches for 6 months and skipped buying new work boots even after the Sauls started letting in rain. He did not complain because sacrifice, to him, was not a speech. It was a receipt folded in a drawer. It was the thermostat set 2 degrees lower. It was choosing the cheaper cut of meat at Kroger and pretending not to notice. Somewhere along the line, though, Melissa stopped seeing sacrifice as love. She started seeing it as proof that their life was too small. The first time she said Nathan lacked ambition, he laughed because he thought she was having a bad day. The third time, he went quiet. By the 20th time, the words no longer surprised him. They simply joined the other quiet damages in the house, sitting between the sofa cushions, behind the bathroom mirror, under the dinner plates where neither of them wanted to look. And now, in a courtroom with polished wood walls and fluorescent lights humming overhead, all those years of showing up had been reduced by Melissa to one claim. The money was hers because luck had touched her hand and not his. Judge Whitaker looked from the document to Melissa again. "I am still waiting," she said. Melissa swallowed. Nathan watched her carefully, not with cruelty, but with the weary focus of a man finally seeing the machine from the inside. Nathan leaned back slightly in the courtroom chair, letting the hum of the air conditioning fill the small space, while he considered the next moments with deliberate care. Outside, the late morning sun caught the courthouse columns, casting long shadows across the steps that would soon be filled with spectators unaware of the quiet tension inside, unaware that the outcome depended not on volume or spectacle, but on the precise orchestration of evidence and timing. Melissa's fingers drummed. Lightly on the edge of the table, the faintest indication of impatience or perhaps disbelief at Nathan's calm demeanor, and he noticed every nuance, every flicker of her eyes, every subtle shift of weight as she tried to maintain control over a situation she had assumed was entirely in her favor. The document submitted by Robert Haynes rested between them, a single sheet with clear lines, stamps, and dates that quietly challenged the narrative Melissa had built around the $20 million lottery win. And Nathan watched as her carefully constructed confidence began to encounter the friction of reality, slowly, methodically, without dramatic motion but with undeniable effect. He recalled the sequence of events that had led them here, the early mornings filling out forms for joint accounts, the nights spent balancing budgets, the small daily tasks that built a life together, each act of consideration a foundation that had seemed invisible to Melissa but was now emerging as critical evidence of shared contribution and intent. Nathan's mind traced each page in the folder, each note and highlighted section, rehearsing the order of presentation, imagining the subtle pause, the gentle handoff, the judge's brief glance at the relevant lines that would force acknowledgement without a word of confrontation. He considered how long Melissa had relied on assumptions, how she had equated excitement and luck with sole ownership, forgetting that months of shared responsibility and documented transactions could be traced, verified, and presented with clarity. The courtroom had grown still, the soft scratching of pens on paper and the quiet shuffle of legal pads becoming the backdrop for the slow accumulation of understanding, the kind that only comes when careful observation and precise preparation meet unchallenged truth. Nathan noted the way Melissa's shoulders slumped fractionally. how her eyes tracked the document as though it might leap off the page to alter the facts, the faint tightening around her mouth revealing the first hints of tension that her outward expression attempted to mask. He reflected on his own restraint, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the subtle control of posture, hands, and gaze that allowed him to occupy the space fully without aggression, maintaining authority through calm presence. A method perfected over years of observing systems, patterns, and outcomes, both mechanical and human. Outside, the day moved on. The courthouse steps bathed in sunlight, the world oblivious to the quiet power shift within, as Nathan waited, patient, deliberate, every nerve attentive, every detail catalogued, the long-term preparation finally converging with the present, setting the stage for the unfolding clarity that would leave no doubt in the minds of anyone who saw the evidence laid bare. He sipped water from a glass he had poured minutes earlier, the cool liquid a small ritual to maintain focus and composure, and in that measured moment, he realized that victory was not loud. It was precise, methodical, and quietly inescapable, resting in the careful intersection of preparation, observation, and the unassailable truth that was about to reshape the assumptions of everyone in the room. Nathan observed as the bailiff returned with the folded document, his fingers lightly resting on the table, the weight of every prior decision and careful observation pressing silently in the air between them. Melissa's eyes followed the movement, flicking from the paper to Nathan and then back, as if expecting some unnoticed error or subtle trick that would maintain her perceived control, and he allowed her to wonder without interruption, knowing that the tension was already tilting toward clarity. He remembered the quiet nights spent compiling evidence, the bank statements meticulously organized, emails cross-referenced, and the ledger of shared accounts stacked neatly on his office desk, each entry a small proof of shared responsibility and participation in the household that had once seemed invisible to Melissa. Nathan's gaze drifted to the courthouse windows where morning sunlight traced pale lines across the polished floors, creating a stage that highlighted each movement, each gesture, each subtle reaction, and he knew that in this light, patience and observation would be more revealing than any confrontation or speech. Melissa shifted slightly in her chair, a faint rustle of fabric that he noticed, the slightest tightening of her grip on the edge of the table, small signals that her confidence was beginning to encounter the friction of reality, and Nathan remained calm, absorbing each detail while maintaining the steady rhythm of his own posture, his presence a quiet assertion of attention and control. Robert Haynes remained by his side, the folder open with pages neatly arranged, highlighted sections facing upward, lines of numbers and dates tracing a path of undeniable logic, and Nathan felt the subtle satisfaction that comes from preparation executed thoroughly, the kind that allowed facts to speak before emotion, letting truth carry its own authority. Melissa's attorney leaned forward, whispering hurriedly, but she did not respond, her eyes fixed on the folder. And Nathan understood that this silence was more potent than any argument could have been, that the unfolding comprehension of documented facts was beginning to eclipse her prior assumptions. He recalled the early days of their marriage, the small rituals of trust and responsibility, the payment of bills, shared errands, the steady accumulation of a life that had been built patiently. And he realized how those years of ordinary diligence now reinforced the structure of undeniable evidence, the foundation upon which this courtroom moment rested. The judge shifted slightly, examining the document, the courtroom quiet except for the faint shuffle of papers, and Nathan noted the subtle changes in Melissa's posture, the fractional pause as she considered what she was reading. The way her carefully maintained composure wavered imperceptibly. Nathan sipped his water slowly, feeling the cool weight in his hand, the rhythmic clarity of his breathing, and allowed the small comfort to reinforce the quiet certainty that preparation, observation, and methodical accumulation of evidence had brought him to a point where control was neither forced nor displayed, but simply present, undeniable in the calm assertion of truth that was now unfolding before everyone in the room, including Melissa, whose carefully cultivated perception of advantage was beginning to shift under the steady illumination of reality. Melissa tried to speak, but the sentence fell apart before it found its shape. "Your Honor, I did not hide anything," she said, and even from across the table Nathan could hear the missing confidence inside those words. Victor Lang stood beside her, so quickly his chair legs made a sharp sound against the courtroom floor, and for a second every eye in the room moved toward him. "Your Honor, my client purchased the ticket independently," he said. "The ticket was in her possession, claimed under her name, and the prize was issued to her as the named winner. We maintain that this is separate property." Judge Whitaker did not react the way Melissa expected. She did not nod. She did not dismiss the document. She looked down at the page again, then turned to the next item Robert Haynes had submitted, a bank statement with one transaction highlighted in yellow. Nathan remembered highlighting it himself at his kitchen table at 11:32 on a rainy Thursday night, the lamp buzzing softly above him, a cup of cold coffee beside his elbow, his work shirt still smelling faintly of metal dust and winter air. He had stared at that transaction until the numbers no longer looked like numbers. They looked like a door. $8.50 at the Sunoco station off State Route 42. Same day, same hour, same card. Their card. The card linked to the account where his overtime pay had landed 2 days earlier. It was not glamorous evidence. It was not dramatic. It was just plain, ordinary paper. But ordinary paper has a way of ending extraordinary lies. Robert stepped forward, voice calm. "Your Honor, the issue is not merely whose hand held the ticket at the counter. The issue is the source of funds, the timing of acquisition, the marital account used, and the accuracy of the sworn disclosure after the prize was claimed." Melissa stared at him as if he had spoken a language she never expected Nathan's side to know. Nathan kept his hands folded. He thought about the weeks after the win, when Melissa began moving through their house like a visitor choosing what to keep from a hotel room. She replaced her old sedan with a black Mercedes. She started spending afternoons downtown with people she called advisors. She changed the password on her laptop. She took calls on the back patio, even when it was cold enough for frost to cling to the railing. At first, Nathan told himself people acted strangely when life changed fast. $20 million would shake anyone. But then she stopped saying, "our house," and started saying, "this place." She stopped asking if he wanted dinner and started telling him he could heat something up. She stopped looking at him like a husband and started looking at him like an obstacle she had not yet removed. Then came the apartment. He found out by accident, the way husbands often discover the truth, not through a confession, but through a receipt folded carelessly in a jacket pocket. First month's rent. Security deposit. A luxury building near the river. Paid before the divorce papers were even filed. Nathan had sat in his truck outside the grocery store for 20 minutes after finding it, watching carts roll across the parking lot in the wind, realizing she had not been planning a conversation. She had been planning an exit. Judge Whitaker finally looked up. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, "your disclosure listed the lottery proceeds as separate property and did not identify the joint account transaction connected to the purchase. Is that correct?" Melissa's attorney opened his mouth, but the judge raised one hand. Not sharply, just enough. "I am asking Mrs. Caldwell." The courtroom went still again. Melissa swallowed, and Nathan saw her eyes move toward him for the first time without contempt. There was something else there now. Calculation, maybe. Fear, maybe. Regret was too generous a word. "I did not think it mattered," she said quietly. Nathan looked down at his wedding ring, the pale circle it left on his finger, and understood something with painful clarity. That had always been the problem. The things that mattered to him had become things she did not think mattered at all. Nathan remained seated, hands resting lightly on the courtroom table, observing the subtle shifts in Melissa's posture as the judge examined the documents carefully, the quiet hum of the courthouse lights filling the room with a steady rhythm, while every eye in the gallery seemed to hold its breath. He recalled the careful weeks of preparation, the nights spent reviewing bank statements, receipts, and financial disclosures, organizing them meticulously so that each piece of evidence would flow logically and undeniably when presented, a methodical strategy that relied not on volume or confrontation, but on clarity and precision. Melissa's confidence, once radiant and effortless, began to falter, her eyes flicking repeatedly between the highlighted transactions, the notes Robert Haynes had prepared, and the judge's calm but scrutinizing gaze. And Nathan noticed each micro-expression, the tightening of her lips, the slight lift of her eyebrows, the almost imperceptible shift in her hands as the realization of oversight settled in. The judge's voice, measured and neutral, carried over the soft murmur of the courtroom, asking for clarification on the timing and source of funds used to purchase the lottery ticket. The very question Nathan had anticipated, and he felt the satisfaction of preparation aligning with execution as Melissa struggled to respond coherently. Victor Lang leaned closer to Melissa, whispering reassurances that seemed increasingly hollow under the weight of the documented evidence, while Nathan's own attorney, Robert, remained composed, standing beside him with a calm assurance that every paper, note, and record had been strategically placed to support the unfolding narrative. Nathan reflected briefly on the early days of the marriage, when shared responsibilities and mutual trust had defined their routine, from paying bills to preparing meals, and how those same routines, carefully recorded and documented, now underpinned the legal strategy that was subtly dismantling Melissa's assumptions of control. He noted the faint reactions of the gallery, the whispered acknowledgments among the observers as the evidence was revealed, and he understood that power in this room was not a matter of aggression but of timing, understanding, and quiet assertion. Melissa finally lifted her eyes to meet his, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face, and Nathan held her gaze for a fraction longer than necessary, not to intimidate, but to allow the recognition that the advantage she presumed was hers had shifted, that the meticulous preparation he had undertaken could not be countered by charm or assumptions. He sipped his water deliberately, the coolness grounding him as he continued to watch the subtle changes in tone and expression throughout the room, knowing that each observation added weight to the unfolding outcome. Outside, the sun highlighted the courthouse steps, unaware of the quiet drama within, while Nathan felt the culmination of weeks of patience and methodical effort manifesting in this precise moment. The courtroom itself a stage where clarity, preparation, and unwavering calm dictated the flow of events and revealed the truth to all present. Leaving Melissa to confront the unforeseen consequences of oversight and assumption as the proceedings continued under the watchful and impartial eye of Judge Margaret Whittaker. Nathan watched as Judge Margaret Whittaker held the highlighted page before her, the calm authority in her eyes contrasting sharply with the tension that had accumulated in Melissa's shoulders over the past hour. The courtroom had fallen into a heavy silence, each person present aware that the unfolding sequence was altering the perceived balance of power with every word, gesture, and careful observation. Melissa shifted slightly, her hand brushing against the folded edge of the papers, and Nathan noticed the faint tremor, subtle enough that it might have been missed by anyone else, signaling the first crack in the facade she had so confidently constructed. Robert Haynes, standing beside Nathan, maintained a composed stance, the quiet assurance in his presence amplifying Nathan's calm, a contrast to the rising unease that now seemed to ripple through Melissa and her attorney, Victor Lang, who leaned in slightly but did not speak, recognizing that the facts presented were self-evident. Nathan's mind traced back to the careful weeks of preparation, the late nights at his kitchen table with a lamp buzzing softly above, highlighting spreadsheets, receipts, and bank statements meticulously compiled and cross-referenced, each entry a silent assertion of truth that had been ready for this exact moment. He recalled the small details he had observed over months, from the way Melissa had handled the lottery ticket to the subtle changes in her demeanor after the win, the timing of purchases, the movement of funds between accounts, and how each seemingly ordinary event had formed a chain of evidence that could not be disputed once assembled logically in the courtroom. He noted how the gallery of observers had gone still, the clerk's pen hovering mid-scribble, the soft rustle of papers from attorneys, all contributing to the weighted pause in the room that amplified the impact of the revelations. And he allowed the silence to reinforce the authority that truth carried over assumptions and expectations. Judge Whittaker's voice cut gently through the tension, asking Melissa to explain why the joint account transaction had not been disclosed, her tone firm yet measured, the words carrying more weight than any argument Victor Lang could have made, leaving Melissa momentarily speechless, her confidence wavering visibly as she searched for a response that could reconcile her assumptions with the documented evidence. Nathan observed every micro-expression, the tightening around her eyes, the subtle shifting of her posture, the slight parting of her lips, each signaling the recognition that her previously assumed control was no longer assured, that preparation, observation, and methodical compilation of facts had shifted the dynamics decisively. He allowed a slow inhale, noting the rhythm of his own heartbeat and the steadying effect of awareness, realizing that power in this room was being expressed not through volume, gestures, or confrontation, but through the undeniable clarity of documented truth presented with patience and precision. As the judge continued to review the material, Nathan's gaze swept across the courtroom, taking in the reactions, the faint glances, the slight leaning forward of observers who sensed the unfolding shift, and he understood that the moment had reached its apex, the carefully constructed tension beginning to resolve as reality asserted itself over assumptions. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows cast soft lines across the polished floors, highlighting each subtle movement and reaction, while Nathan remained seated, composed, the quiet embodiment of preparedness and unshakable calm, knowing that the careful orchestration of weeks of observation and documentation had achieved its purpose, leaving Melissa and all present to confront the consequences of overlooked details and the undeniable assertion of fact in the hands of reason and patience. Judge Margaret Whitaker set the final page down with a quietness that somehow sounded louder than a gavel. For a few seconds, no one moved. Melissa sat frozen beside Victor Lang, her expression no longer polished, no longer amused, no longer certain that money had made her untouchable. The judge looked at her over the rim of her glasses and said, "This court will not accept an incomplete disclosure, and it will not treat a marital account as irrelevant simply because one party found the outcome inconvenient." The sentence did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like a locked door clicking shut. Nathan felt the breath leave the room. Robert Haynes nodded once, barely enough to notice, but Nathan saw it. That was the signal. The truth had crossed from private knowledge into public record. Melissa's hand moved toward the signed papers, then stopped. The same document she had treated like a victory lap now looked like something unfinished and dangerous. Judge Whitaker continued, her voice controlled and absolute, explaining that the lottery proceeds would require full review, that the source of funds, the timing of the purchase, and the failure to disclose related financial activity would be examined before any divorce agreement could move forward. She also ordered preservation of all financial records connected to the prize, the new accounts, the apartment lease, and any transfers made after the claim. Melissa stared straight ahead. Victor wrote quickly, but his pen moved with less confidence than before. Nathan did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply sat there, hands folded, feeling the strange calm that comes after a storm you prepared for, but still had to survive. He thought about all the nights he had wondered whether he was being too careful, too quiet, too patient. He thought about the old Ford in the courthouse parking lot, the cracked cup holder, the work boots in the back seat, the life Melissa had laughed at because it did not shine brightly enough for her anymore. But steady things have their own kind of power. A paycheck landing every other Friday. A receipt saved in a drawer. A shared account no one expected to matter. A man who did not raise his voice because he had already done the work. When the hearing ended, Nathan stood slowly and removed his wedding ring. He did not slam it down. He did not hand it to her. He placed it in his coat pocket, where it landed with the soft weight of something that used to mean forever. Melissa looked at him then, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in months. "Nathan," she said, but there was nothing ready behind his name. No apology strong enough. No explanation clean enough. He picked up his folder, thanked Robert, and walked toward the courthouse doors. Outside, the Ohio air was cold and bright, the kind of morning that makes every breath visible. Nathan stepped into the sunlight, not as a man who had taken revenge, but as a man who had refused to be erased. The money would be divided by law. The documents would speak. The judge would decide. But his dignity had already been returned to him the moment he chose patience over panic and truth over performance. And maybe that is the part worth remembering. When someone underestimates a quiet person, they often forget silence is not emptiness. Sometimes silence is where the strongest evidence is being gathered. So what would you have felt sitting in that courtroom, watching the smile fade when the facts finally spoke? Would you have stayed calm like Nathan, or would the humiliation have broken your composure? Stories like this remind us that character is not revealed when life is easy, but when everything you built is tested under bright lights and sworn statements. If this story made you think about trust, fairness, and the power of quiet preparation, stay with this channel, because the next story may make you question who really holds the truth when everyone else thinks the case is already closed.